Hi, Lenny Bianchi for 5-Star Security. To protect our customers, I've spent 20 years researching monitoring stations, and I've literally traveled the country. I've flown out to California to visit American Two-Way. I've driven up to New York to visit Rapid Response. I've done business with COPS Monitoring in New Jersey, CMS in Florida, Alarm Watch in Baltimore, Security Watch Central in Tennessee, Security Central in North Carolina, and a few others. I evaluate monitoring stations based on 3 primary criteria. First, I need to see the station. I want a comprehensive tour. I'm looking for signs that this is a well-run business, that things seem to be happening smoothly, or employees on task. And speaking of those employees, are they coming up to me with a big smile and welcoming me, or are they kind of just walking past me with eyes straight ahead? Because I know that's how they'll treat my customers. Of course, I want to see the nerve center where the operators are taking the incoming calls. One of the stations I mentioned, I won't say which one, actually enjoys a very good reputation for their response time. But when they took me to where their operators were, I was shocked. They were sitting around card tables. You know what I mean? 4x4 foot, folding leg, kind of rickety card tables. And they weren't wearing headsets, but were using receiver-type telephones. So this one might hear information that one repeats, and sensitive information could be compromised. Even though that station enjoyed a good reputation for their response time, I knew if any of my customers saw a picture of what I was looking at and thought, wow, that's where 5-Star is monitoring my system, their level of confidence in me would drop to the floor. So that ruled them out. The second primary criterion that I look at when evaluating a monitoring station is the owner. Hopefully it never happens, but if something should ever go drastically wrong, I need to be sure the owner is a person I feel totally comfortable with. We could sit down at the table and work things out reasonably. Again, one of the stations I mentioned, I won't say which one, the owner comes out to meet me. Very nice guy, dressed in, I don't know, maybe a $3,000 suit. Pretty nice. He's puffing on a cigar and bragging to me about the fact that he has 5 cell phones. I'm not making this up. I thought, this guy lives in a different universe than I do. I'm a pretty down-to-earth guy. I knew if there was ever a serious problem here, there was little chance that this guy and I would see eye to eye, and it ruled him out. The third primary criterion I look at when evaluating a monitoring station is their response time. Of course, they'll all tell me what the response time is based on their statistics, the shift, time of day, that sort of thing. But that's really meaningless to me. I have to find out what their response time is. So I'll say, give me a sample account number I can play with for a month or so, and the phone number to the receiver for that account number. Over the course of the month, I'll randomly send them 15 to 20 alarm signals and use my stopwatch to time their response each time. I start my stopwatch when I set the alarm off, and I stop it when the phone rings with their response. After averaging all their times together, I come up with a reliable response time for that station. Hi, Lenny Bianchi for 5-Star Security. Hopefully you've seen the previous video on evaluating monitoring stations. This video is a follow-up to that one. If you were to choose 5-Star Security to be your security company, the monitoring station we'd be using for you is the same one we use for all our customers and one we've been using for around 20 years. Security Central. Security Central is located in Statesville, North Carolina, just over the Virginia border. Security Central is one of the oldest monitoring stations in the country. They've been in business for well over 40 years. There aren't many monitoring stations that have been around that long. Security Central is what I consider to be the sweet spot as far as size. What do I mean by that? Well, you might have a local security company that operates their own in-house monitoring station, and there are pros and cons to doing it that way, but they're probably handling no more than 15 to 20,000 accounts. That means they're making good money on that side of their business, but in my opinion, there isn't sufficient revenue coming in to really do things the right way, with proper redundancy of equipment and backup power systems. The opposite end of the spectrum is a station trying to handle 5 to 6 million accounts. Now the problem is, you're no longer a human being to them, you're an account number. If you're ever unhappy with their service, you may not find a sympathetic ear. After all, they just put on 10,000 new accounts last month. They're not going to miss you. By the way, you're still stuck with them for the years left on your contract. Security Central currently monitors about 300,000 accounts nationwide. That puts them in a very good position. Not only do they have sufficient revenue coming in to really do things the right way, and I'll give you a few examples in a minute, but they're not so big that they've lost track of the fact that our customers are human beings. Their operators are very professional, well-trained and screened, but also very friendly and respectful. My customers love them so much that when they leave the area and take their security system with them, it's not unusual for them to ask me, "Hey, can we stay with Security Central in our new location? We've been really happy with them." Of course, they provide monitoring service in all 50 states, and so they don't have to try out a new monitoring station. They know they'll be happy with Security Central. Security Central is a family-owned business. Courtney and Ellen Brown, brother and sister, inherited the business from their parents, who started it back in 1970. Security Central is a UL-listed monitoring station. Underwriters Laboratories has many difficult standards that must be met in order for a station to qualify for their listing. Not all monitoring stations are UL listed. Security Central meets all of those standards and exceeds them in some very important areas. Whenever your system goes into alarm, it's making a call out to the monitoring station. At the other end of the line, there's this big box called a central station receiver. These are very expensive pieces of equipment and can cost upwards of $70,000 just for one. UL requires that to qualify for their listing, for every 5 receivers you have online, you have to have one standby, 20% backup in case one of the 5 fails. Security Central meets that standard, and they exceed it. For new systems installed by 5-Star Security, Security Central has one backup receiver for every receiver in use. That's 5 times what UL requires. What happens when the power goes out? UL requires the monitoring station to have an emergency standby generator big enough to handle all vital aspects of the station. For Security Central, that required a 180 kilowatt Kohler diesel generator. That satisfied UL, but it didn't satisfy Security Central. They bought a second one. So they have 2 180 kilowatt diesel generators, either one of which is able to keep the station up and running, twice what UL requires. UL also says they must maintain 24 hours of fuel supply at all times for their generator. Security Central meets that standard and exceeds it. They have 96 hours of reserve fuel for each of their generators for a total of 8 days fuel supply. 8 times what UL requires. And they're on a priority delivery schedule with diesel suppliers in the area. If they need an emergency delivery, all they have to do is pick up the phone and the nearest fuel delivery truck will be immediately diverted to Security Central to dump their load. It takes about 5 to 10 seconds from the time the power goes out until your outlets have power again from a generator. A transfer relay has to close. Then the motor has to start up and rev up to the proper RPM. The electronics have to check the output to make sure the voltage is correct and there are no surges. We all know what happens if you unplug your desktop computer from the outlet for 5 to 10 seconds and then plug it back in. Might as well go make a grilled cheese sandwich and some iced tea, because it takes several minutes for your computer to boot up again and be ready to go. Of course, during that time, the monitoring station could be missing lots of alarm calls trying to get in. To cover for the few seconds it takes for the generator to come online, Security Central has a UPS system for the entire station. They've invested close to $250,000 just for their UPS system. It's an entire room. It's kind of noisy inside because the air conditioner is running to keep it cool. There are these large black steel racks from the floor to the ceiling with narrow aisles. These racks are filled with drawers with several large automotive-sized batteries in each one. UL requires a monitoring station to have 15 minutes of UPS to receive their listing. Security Central meets this standard and exceeds it by a factor of 12. They have 3 hours of UPS available to run the station until the generator comes online. Once a week, Security Central turns off the power to the building at the main breaker for a half hour to make sure all their emergency power systems operate flawlessly. This just gives you a few examples of why we think Security Central is easily within the top 5% of all monitoring stations in the country. Because they offer a very high level of service and reliability, the wholesale rate they charge us to monitor our customers is double what many other dealers are paying their stations. But don't worry, our rates are competitive with other companies. Because protecting our customers is so important to 5-star security, we're happy to have a top-notch monitoring station to provide that service.